What greater honor could be there than to share some reflection at such an important forum to foster the encounter and integration of science and religion? Our former Chancellor Sorondo birthday is a formal occasion, a particularly happy one because his career is synonymous with attention and dedication to philosophy. Philosophy is precisely the kind of knowledge that, better than any other, can outline questions and for categories that relate to science and religion. Chancellor Sanchez Sorondo was responsible for first defining the fundamental issues in this debate during his year at the Pontifical Lateran University, where he was professor of history of philosophy, and even dean 3 times. Archbishop Sorondo has strenuously worked on healing fragmentations, seeking unity, and establishing the dialogue between philosophical disciplines and other forms of knowledge. More specifically, he has cultivated the relationship between philosophy of science and science, forging concepts and contexts useful for harmonizing seemingly different sensibilities. 3 questions are central to our plenary session. What are new and emerging breakthroughs in science? How have scientific breakthroughs come about, and how can they influence better ways to reduce problems threatening people, peace, and the planet? I have been asked to refer to one of the best-known Italians of all time, the great Galileo Galilei. Will humbly try to ensure that the figure of Galileo and this role in the development of philosophical and scientific thought can provide some insight to answer these questions. First point, the emerging new science at a historical turning point. Modern science was born between the metaphor of the organism and the metaphor of the machine, inheriting the rich sensibility of the Renaissance. The complexity and stratification of the cultural and social processes between the mid-15th and 17th century are reminiscent of what is happening today. In many respects, we are living in a revolutionary era, like Renaissance today. The urgencies related to the protection of the planet and energy management and so on make our era very similar to the Renaissance for a certain sense. Valuing the potential of novelty rather above the difficulty posed by transformation is an attitude that can make our time an epochal moment of transition, bringing about an epochal change and not a change of era, as Pope Francis says, Evangelii Gaudium 52, such as to leave a distinct and positive conceptual and material legacy. Galileo lived in the context of a real change of epoch. In this context, he acted as the interpreter, promoter, and prophet of a more delimited and specific, yet not less revolutionary change, that the political change is taking place, the transformation of the old natural philosophy and the change associated with the new sciences. Many of Galileo's discoveries would deserve a Nobel Prize today. The use of the telescope to observe the heavens, the earthy nature of the moons, Jupiter's satellites, the observation of countless stars, Saturn rings, sunspots, the law of pendulum, and so on and so on. But Galileo would have deserved a literary prize and maybe a theological award. The intuition of novelties is one thing, their systematic development quite another. To do so, he would have had to wait for an established tradition of shared scientific research. Thus, we come to our first question. What are these new breakthroughs in sciences? Galileo brought many breakthroughs to science. In order to decide that a fact is new, we need to understand what an old fact is. A fact is old when it is known and explained by previous categories still in use. Considering the most recent studies, there are novelties obtained by looking for something that has been posited within a theory, but has not yet been found, as recently it happened with Einstein's gravitational waves. Then there are some novelties which are neither soft nor supposed unusual facts that are initially difficult to identify, as in the well-known case of Röntgen, a specific form of serendipity, which is not entirely coincidental, as it occurs within scientific studies and experiments. So second point, the evolutive thinking. How did scientific breakthroughs come about? This is the second question we are investigating in our plenary session. How does science change? What determines the turning points in science? Galileo's story is a notable one because political, theological, scientific, and ontological problems are intertwined in his life and career. One refers to the other as typical in epochal changes. Conceptual boundaries can only exist when the questions and the logical and material tools to seek answers have become clear. Until this happens, there is a tension between the desire to understand and the realization that questions are reducible to doubts and uncertainties. Galileo abjured and remained a Catholic without abandoning his scientific convictions. Convictions were not only based on data and measurements. Data and measurements were held together by arguments and conceptual tools. I would like to go to the Assayer, a landmark work published exactly 400 years ago. This masterpiece is widely known as a treatise on the scientific method and as an exemplar of rhetoric and scientific communication. Indeed, Galileo devised this argumentative, logical, and rhetoric, not only experimental stratagems, for the real purpose of the work, weakening the arguments for geocentrism, including those by Tycho Brahe and Huygens. The end justified the means, and the means Galileo used were both experimental and conceptual. The philosophy of science developed over the last 100 years has sought to address the question of why science changes. The best known proposal is that by Thomas Kuhn, who identified both empirical and social reasons for scientific preservation or change. Science as a social and collective enterprise had already been noted by Ludwig Fleck, who had spoken of thought collectives. After Kuhn, Lakatos sought new ways to integrate this historical approach with rationality criteria to explain the change in scientific theories. More recently, this perspective has been updated by recognizing that science is the enterprise of a varied community, which includes women, of course, people of different social and geopolitical origins, and scholars with different cultural and personal backgrounds. Data and observation are crucial factors when they bring out new facts. Nevertheless, a scientific crisis depends on how the facts manifest themselves to the sophisticated experience of the community of scientists. Between the input data and the observations, there is any hypothetical outcome, that is, the compromise between what one already knows and what one expects to know. Each hypothesis is then further corroborated, refined, and refuted. One knows what one learns, said Aristotle, and I go to the third point. With and beyond Galileo, the curiosity-driven science. I have just quoted Aristotle. Archbishop Sanchez Sorondo is a philosopher who has long dealt with the classics of philosophy, primarily Aristotle. In 1993, he edited and presented a volume of contribution by professor from the Library Faculty Philosophy of Pontifical Lateran University, where he was dean. Sanchez Sorondo urged an engagement with the Aristotelian thought and with the Greek view of nature. Note the continuity with the concept of this lecture, which recalls Aristotle's words at the beginning of the book A of Metaphysics. Wonder drives knowledge, an assumption already found in Plato. This view of human knowledge was later complemented by Thomas Aquinas, who recognized the mediated character of our knowledge. This mediation occurs through the human being standing in front of the object he has to study. Unde hoc non est demonstratio, sed suppositio quaedam. These are very relevant words when read from the perspective I am outlining. Scientific theory proceeds via hypotheses and experiments from one vital aspect to another, so knowledge is never definitive. Galileo's curiosity was accompanied by the Libertas Philosophandi, which was instrumental in producing new ways of thinking. Only after their emergence can we speak of new systems of thought. But at that point, it is legitimate to ask what consequences they bring. After Galileo and modern science, it became increasingly evident that science and technology modify society. Thinkers like Ancianas reflected extensively on this topic, linking technical application and the exercise of freedom. This revealed the deeper link between curiosity and freedom. Here, we come to the last question of the plenary session. How can scientific breakthroughs influence new, better, and more effective ways to reduce threats and problems for people, species, and the planet? Let's start from people. What is the link between scientific breakthroughs and respect for the human person? Realities are greater than ideas, Pope Francis, Evangelii Gaudium. Science is the speculative journey that teaches us to ponder things, compare ideas with reality data, activate synergies and collaborations within scholars, question assumptions, expose errors, come to terms with uncertainty, evaluate methods, and trust the resolutions they lead to. Science teaches humility, the most important of virtues for the growth of knowledge. However, it can only do so when it becomes aware of its history and epistemological foundations. Without this critical awareness, any scientist can become arrogant, if he forgets that scientific theories are the complex product of achievements and defeats, contradictions, win-wins, and paradoxes. As for peace, its relationship with science has been widely discussed by influential scholars, thinking in 1955 when Albert Einstein and Bertrand Russell published the Manifesto for Peace, which inspired the Pugwash movement for disarmament and peace at the end of the last century. The role of political engagement and science diplomacy to promote peace and international security in the atomic age is evident. This is a sadly topical and urgent issue even now. Finally, we come to the planet, our common home. Science makes possible technologies and vice versa. We often speak of sustainable development, but for development to be sustainable, adequate cultural action is key to promote good practices, but also as a correct way of understanding the continuity between human beings and the environment. As conclusion, Veritas as Gaudium. Galileo questions is helpful to point out the need to discuss the integration of science and religion as pieces of knowledge using history and philosophy as a bridge. There is an urgent need to do more than just note the degree of personal integration between the two in a scientist's life. Even a dialogical approach or cross-fertilization to reach discussion would not be sufficient. The purpose of this discussion is not only to engage in dialogue, but to find methods and categories to develop a systematic and rigorous integration. The plenary sessions offer new narratives within which experts and practitioners can shape the collective vision of science in a way that respects the result of scientific research and the philosophical inquiry on science. Bernard de Fontenelle lamented the drudgery of the physical and mathematical sciences, but recalled that in Homer's time, it was a source of great wonder that a man could subject speech to a rhythm and measure. Fontenelle hoped that the scholars of his time would be remembered as the creators of great wonders. For what future generations will remember our epochal change? First of all, a credible synthesis capable of harmonizing the contribution of science and its rigor with categories comprehensible to not sciences and respectful of our common home. Secondly, knowledge must lead to joy, and scientia does not rhyme with tristitia. Gaudium is the measure of veritas itself. Awareness of the processuality and gradualness of the development of scientific knowledge, the ability to share this knowledge with others, the possibility of making it an instrument for common growth, and the continual amazement of the fact that the nature is given to human beings to be progressively understood via collective effort that calls for humility and the sharing of satisfaction. All these aspects are embedded in a new style of reasoning that science is teaching today. So, science can indicate a style of knowledge, sharing, and learning that is very close to the recent criteria for the renewal of church teaching. I quote Veritatis Gaudium, number 4. This style opens not only the mind, but also the heart to joy, since joy is what characterizes the truth. Furthermore, only that which gives joy can claim to be a timid reflection of a truth that goes beyond us to unite us. Thank you.